The sky above Germany was about to become a graveyard. Only one bomber would escape the slaughter when the sun set that October day in 1943. This was the morning 274 flying fortresses lifted off from English soil. This was the morning when the Luftwaffe prepared its most devastating trap. This was the morning that would forever brand one bomb group with a name written in blood. But the story begins not with takeoff, but with return. Picture a single B-17 crawling across the channel. Smoke pours from her wounded engines. Her aluminum skin is shredded like paper. Inside, men bleed onto cold metal floors while two pilots fight controls that barely respond. She is alone in an endless sky. Where are the other 273 bombers? Where are the hundreds of crews who shared breakfast that morning? The answer lies scattered across German soil in fragments of steel and bone. The Royal Flush was never supposed to survive. Her position at the formation's tail made her the most vulnerable target of all. Enemy fighters always struck from behind first. Yet somehow she endured what no other fortress could. How does a single aircraft escape when an entire armada perishes? The answer reveals the most brutal truth about daylight bombing over Nazi Germany. October, cold bit through flight jackets that morning at Thorpe Abbotts. Engines coughed to life across the Norfolk airfield. Men moved like shadows between the bombers, their faces pale in the dawn light. They knew. Something about this mission felt different. The briefing had been unusually quiet. Maps showed a red line stretching deep into enemy territory. The target was not a factory or military installation. It was a cathedral, a medieval spire rising above the German city of Münster. Sunday Mass would be gathering when American bombs began to fall. The thought sat heavy in every man's stomach. This was not just another raid. This was something darker. Robert Rosenthal climbed aboard the Royal Flush with practiced movements. As pilot, he carried the weight of 9 other lives. His co-pilot, Pappy Lewis, settled beside him, hands already reaching for familiar switches and gauges. Navigator Ronald Bailey hunched over his charts, calculating headings that might mean the difference between life and death. The bomber itself was both sanctuary and trap. Steel plates offered protection, but also became a cage 6 miles above Earth. Oxygen masks froze to skin at high altitude. Machine guns jammed in the cold. One enemy shell could transform the aircraft into a falling coffin. Yet the B-17 had earned its reputation. Flying Fortress seemed indestructible to those who built it. Marketing promised that tight formations would be impregnable castles in the sky. Reality was teaching different lessons written in blood and smoke. The 100th Bomb Group had already learned those lessons the hard way. Their losses exceeded every other unit. Empty bunks appeared after each mission. Mess hall tables grew quieter. Other groups whispered the nickname that stuck like a curse: the Bloody 100th. Superstition followed them everywhere. Bad luck seemed magnetic to their formations. Yet they continued flying because the war demanded it. American strategy depended on daylight precision bombing. Every raid tested that strategy against German defenses. The theory sounded perfect in Washington conference rooms. Send hundreds of bombers to strike specific targets. Cripple German industry with surgical precision. Force the Luftwaffe into battles of attrition they cannot win. Replace losses faster than the enemy can shoot them down. Practice was written in burning aircraft falling from autumn skies. Every mission proved that no formation was unbreakable. No bomber was truly invincible. The air war was becoming a deadly mathematics problem. How many American lives to trade for each German factory? At Thorpe Abbotts, mathematics meant empty beds and unopened letters from home. It meant mechanics patching holes that told stories no one wanted to hear. It meant ground crews watching silver specks disappear over the horizon, then counting how many returned. The Royal Flush held her place at formation's end as engines warmed. Tail end Charlie was the most exposed position. German fighters would see her first, attack her first, kill her crew first. Yet duty demanded someone fill that slot. Rosenthal ran through his pre-flight routine. Every switch checked. Every gauge monitored. Every prayer whispered silently. His crew moved with the same ritual precision. Bombardier Bucky prepared his sight. Gunners loaded ammunition belts. Radio operator tuned frequencies that might carry their last words. Outside, other bombers rolled toward the runway. Silver bodies caught pale sunlight as they lifted into gray English sky. One by one, they formed the armada that would challenge German air defenses. One by one, they joined the formation that was flying toward annihilation. The target selection had been controversial even among American commanders. Münster was not primarily military. Its cathedral dominated a medieval town center. Railway workers lived in surrounding neighborhoods. The strategic value was real but limited, yet the symbolism was powerful. Strike at the heart of German culture. Show Nazi civilians that nowhere was safe. Break morale through terror from the sky. The decision represented a shift in American bombing doctrine. Precision was giving way to area destruction. For the men loading onto bombers that morning, moral questions seemed distant. Survival occupied every thought. German fighters were waiting. Flak guns were loaded. The odds favored the defenders in every engagement over Reich territory. Intelligence reports promised fighter escort. 200 P-47 Thunderbolts would meet the bombers over Holland. American fighters would clear the sky of German interceptors. The mission would proceed under protective cover all the way to target. But promises made in briefing rooms often died over enemy territory. Weather changed, fuel ran short, communication failed. Escort fighters missed rendezvous points, while bomber formations flew on alone and unprotected. The English Channel passed beneath silver wings like a gray mirror. Beyond lay Holland, then Germany, then Münster. Each mile brought the formation closer to waiting Luftwaffe squadrons. Each minute brought them nearer to the killing ground. Inside the Royal Flush, tension built like pressure before a storm. Intercom chatter was brief and professional. Engine readings steady. Fuel consumption normal. Oxygen flow adequate. Everything appeared routine except for the growing knots in every man's stomach. Behind them stretched 273 other flying fortresses. Engines thundered in harmonious roar that shook the autumn air. The formation was magnificent and terrible. So much steel, so much firepower, so many young men flying toward German guns. At the controls, Rosenthal felt the weight of command. 9 lives depended on his decisions. Their families would blame him if he brought them home in boxes. Their survival required skills he was still learning through trial and error. The bomber formation crossed into Dutch airspace, still expecting salvation. Radio calls requested escort status. Where were the Thunderbolts? Visibility was clear. Navigation was accurate. Yet friendly skies remained empty of American fighters. Instead, black specks appeared on the distant horizon. They grew larger with each heartbeat. Wings resolved from dots. Engines became visible. German fighters in numbers beyond counting. The trap was about to spring. Messerschmitt Bf-109s dove from high altitude. Focke-Wulf 190s swept in from the flanks. Me 110s approached from behind with rocket launchers. The Luftwaffe had concentrated everything available for this single devastating attack. What followed was slaughter disguised as aerial combat. The first German fighters reached the bomber stream within minutes. Cannon shells ripped through aluminum skin. Machine gun tracers carved bright scars across morning sky. Fortresses began exploding in balls of flame. The formation that had appeared so powerful suddenly looked fragile. Gaps opened as bombers fell away trailing smoke. Other aircraft struggled to close ranks while under constant attack. The ordered columns became chaos as pilots fought for survival. Major John Egan, flying in the lead position, watched his Madam Zigzag take rocket hits. Engines died. Smoke poured from damaged wings. His bomber began falling behind the formation. Other pilots throttled back to maintain group integrity. That hesitation created opportunity for German fighters. They poured through formation breaks like wolves attacking scattered sheep. Isolated bombers became easy targets. One after another, they tumbled from the sky in flames. The Royal Flush, at formation's tail, witnessed the destruction with horrifying clarity. Rosenthal and his crew watched comrades die in explosions that lit the morning sky. Parachutes blossomed briefly before disappearing into clouds below. German fighters swarmed through the formation with methodical efficiency. They had trained for this moment, practiced these tactics, prepared for maximum destruction of American bomber streams. The plan was working perfectly. Radio chatter filled with desperate calls. Mayday signals mixed with position reports. Gunners shouted warnings about incoming attacks. Pilots requested assistance that could not come. The airwaves carried the sound of disaster unfolding. Bomber after bomber fell away from the shrinking formation. Some exploded instantly. Others spiraled down, trailing fire and debris. A few managed controlled descents before crashing in Dutch countryside. Most simply vanished in smoking fireballs. The Madam Zigzag finally reached her breaking point. Major Egan gave the bailout order as flames consumed his aircraft. One by one, his crew leaped into empty sky. Parachutes opened like white flowers against the gray morning. Egan stayed at the controls until the last man jumped. Only then did he abandon the dying bomber. The aircraft continued flying for several minutes, unmanned before diving into Dutch soil. Another fortress was gone forever. Now, only 12 bombers remained from the original formation. Then 11. Then 10. Each minute brought another explosion, another scream over radio frequencies, another gap in the rapidly dissolving defensive formation. The Royal Flush pressed forward through the carnage. Her gunners fired at every German fighter within range. Tracers streamed from her machine guns in desperate defensive patterns. But the attacks came from all directions simultaneously. A rocket struck their starboard wing. 2 engines died in bursts of flame and smoke. The bomber lurched sideways, nearly rolling inverted. Rosenthal fought the controls with every ounce of strength, while his co-pilot worked to feather the dead propellers. Still, they flew on toward Münster. The target grew closer despite the chaos around them. Bailey called out navigation updates between enemy attacks. Distance remaining. Time to target. Heading corrections needed for the bomb run. German fighters began withdrawing as the survivors approached the target area. They knew what waited ahead. Anti-aircraft guns surrounded Münster in deadly concentrations. Flak would finish what fighters had started. Only 3 flying fortresses reached the final approach to Münster. The Royal Flush and 2 other battered bombers. Behind them lay the wreckage of 271 aircraft and the bodies of hundreds of airmen. The formation was destroyed, but somehow these 3 survivors still carried bombs toward their target. Somehow, they still flew despite damage that should have killed them. Somehow they pressed on when every rational thought screamed retreat. The cathedral spire of Münster rose ahead through drifting smoke. Church bells were ringing for Sunday morning service. German families were gathering for worship. Within minutes, American bombs would fall among them. Flak guns opened fire with concentrated fury. Black puffs erupted around the approaching bombers. Steel fragments tore through thin aluminum skin. The sky became a forest of explosions designed to destroy anything flying through it. One of the three survivors burst into flames. Her crew bailed out as the bomber rolled inverted. Parachutes drifted down toward German territory and certain captivity. The burning aircraft crashed into Münster's outskirts. The second bomber disintegrated under direct flak hits. No parachutes emerged from the debris shower. 10 more American airmen vanished in an instant. Their families would wait months for official notification of their deaths. Only the Royal Flush remained, alone above the target. Bomb bay doors grinding open despite battle damage. The bombardier took control for the final run, his crosshairs centered on the cathedral below. German gunners concentrated every available weapon on this last bomber. Flak bursts erupted closer and closer. Shrapnel rattled against the fuselage like deadly hail. But somehow, the aircraft held together for a few more seconds. Bombs away. The load tumbled toward Münster as the Royal Flush banked away from the target. Explosions bloomed among the medieval buildings. The cathedral spire cracked and toppled. Fire spread through surrounding neighborhoods. The mission was complete, but survival remained uncertain. German fighters reappeared as the lone bomber turned for home. They sensed wounded prey and closed in for the kill. 6 Focke-Wulfs bore down on the limping fortress. Rear gunner Bill de Blasio steadied his sights. His finger tightened on triggers as enemy fighters filled his gun sight. Tracers streamed toward the approaching aircraft. His aim was deadly accurate despite the bomber's violent maneuvering. The first German fighter's wing sheared away under his gunfire. It collided with a second aircraft. Both exploded in a massive fireball that lit the afternoon sky. De Blasio swung his guns toward the remaining attackers. Another burst of gunfire sent a third fighter spinning toward the ground, trailing smoke and flame. The pilot never had time to bail out. His aircraft augured into a German village and exploded among the houses below. The surviving German fighters fled, rather than face de Blasio's deadly, accurate gunnery. For the first time since leaving England, the Royal Flush flew alone in peaceful sky. The immediate threat was over, but the journey home had barely begun. 2 engines were dead. Fuel was leaking from punctured tanks. Several crew members lay wounded and bleeding on the aircraft floor. The bomber was dying around them. Rosenthal and Lewis struggled with controls that barely responded. The aircraft wanted to roll inverted and dive. Only constant pressure on the control yoke kept them flying level. Every mile toward England required tremendous effort. Weight had to go overboard. Ammunition, oxygen bottles, machine guns, anything not essential for flight. The crew heaved equipment into the void below. Each item represented desperate hope for continued survival. Still, the bomber sagged lower. Altitude leaked away like blood from a wound. The English Channel appeared impossibly distant, yet somehow the engines continued turning. Somehow the wings continued generating lift. Behind them, Germany fell away into afternoon haze. Ahead lay Holland, then water, then safety. But each mile remained a victory against overwhelming odds. Each minute of flight defied probability and mechanical logic. The crew worked in exhausted silence. Wounded men were bandaged with torn clothing. Radio calls went out, requesting emergency landing clearance. Position reports marked their slow progress toward friendly territory. Hours passed. The sun began setting over Holland as the Royal Flush crossed the coast. Below them lay the wreckage of other aircraft from their formation. Smoke columns marked crash sites scattered across the countryside. The English Channel stretched gray and cold beneath their wings. So many aircraft had gone down in those waters. So many crews had perished in the frigid waves. The Channel was both barrier and graveyard, but the Royal Flush continued flying. Her remaining engines labored against gathering darkness. Navigation lights blinked position signals. Radio calls confirmed their identity to British coastal defenses. At last, the white cliffs of England appeared ahead. Beacon lights marked familiar airfields. The bomber began her final approach to Thorpe Abbotts. Home had never looked so precious or so improbable. Ground crews watched in stunned silence as the battered aircraft touched down. She rolled to a stop with smoke still trailing from damaged engines. Only then did the full scope of the disaster become apparent. Of 274 bombers that had taken off that morning, only one returned. The Royal Flush carried the sole survivors of the 100th Bomb Group. Everyone else was dead, missing, or captured. The bloody 100th had lived up to its terrible name. The crew stumbled from their aircraft like ghosts returning from the dead. Medics rushed forward to treat wounded gunners. Officers began compiling casualty reports that would stretch across multiple pages. No celebration greeted their return. No cheers or congratulations, only stunned silence and the realization of what had been lost. The empty bunks, the undelivered letters, the families who would soon receive telegrams no one wanted to read. The Royal Flush stood alone on the tarmac. Her torn fuselage bore witness to the morning's carnage. Mechanics counted over 400 holes in her aluminum skin. By any reasonable standard, she should never have survived. Yet here she was, battle-scarred but intact, a testament to American engineering and crew determination. The aircraft that had carried her men through hell and brought them safely home. The Münster raid entered 8th Air Force history as one of its darkest days. The losses exceeded all previous records. An entire bomb group effectively destroyed in a single mission. The cost of daylight bombing had never been more apparent. For American commanders, the disaster forced difficult questions about bombing strategy. Could precision attacks justify such casualties? Were the targets worth the lives being lost? The answers would reshape American air doctrine. Within months, long-range fighter escorts changed the balance of aerial warfare. P-51 Mustangs began accompanying bomber formations deep into German territory. The slaughter over Münster helped ensure such unescorted missions would not be repeated. For the survivors, the legacy was deeply personal. They had witnessed the destruction of their unit, watched friends die in burning aircraft, survived when hundreds of others perished. The memories would never fade. Robert Rosenthal continued flying combat missions despite what he had experienced. His courage under fire became legendary throughout the 8th Air Force. He embodied the resilience that characterized American bomber crews. Today, visitors to Thorpe Abbotts see preserved buildings and empty runways. They hear stories of young men who climbed aboard silver bombers and flew into the teeth of German defenses. Some returned. Many did not. The Royal Flush became more than an aircraft. She became a symbol of survival against impossible odds, of crew determination in the face of overwhelming enemy opposition, of the thin line between annihilation and endurance. Her story reminds us that courage is often measured not by victory, but by persistence. not by conquest, but by the will to continue when everything seems lost. The bomber that limped home alone carried more than wounded men. She carried the memory of all who did not return, the legacy of sacrifice that helped win the war, the proof that even in the darkest skies, hope could still find its way back to Earth.